Hi, I'm Brian Lord, President of Premier Speakers Bureau, and welcome to Free Virtual Fridays. This gives you the opportunity to see a lot of different types of speakers and figure out how you can use virtual to help you and your team get better. This week we have John Acuff. John is one of our favorite speakers here at Premier and the first speaker we've had on twice for Free Virtual Fridays. John's presentation before was Pivot, Don't Panic. And now after 6 months, he is switching and doing a really well-received presentation called Beyond the Pivot. So let's welcome John Acuff.
I feel like the murder hornets haven't been as bad as we were promised. I wanted to start things off today with a positive message, and I think we can all agree that is a nice silver lining. No one watching this right now is recovering from a murder hornet sting. That's definitely encouraging. But it has been a weird year, right? I'm Zooming more than I ever anticipated. That's happening way more than I thought it would be. I'm in Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call, and I've noticed a few weird things. One is that some people are doing meetings with an unmade bed in the background. Some people are even doing meetings laying on top of their bed like they're Cleopatra. Bring me grapes, no skins. I don't want to see a single grape skin. I'm getting into arguments about eating food during a Zoom call. I have friends that will eat or drink during a call, and I'll say it's really loud, and they go, well, no, it's not. I mean, I used to have regular meetings, and they'd be catered. I agree. But in those meetings, you weren't mic'd up. No one had a mic while you ate the bagel to record every chomp and slurp. Zoom is a strange time for all of us to go through, and it's been a strange year. And I think the biggest challenge is actually twofold. Number one, we don't know what's going to happen. And number two, we don't know when we'll know what's going to happen. There have been other times in my life when I didn't know what would happen, but I knew when I'd know. For instance, when I applied to college, I didn't know if I'd get in, but I knew when they'd tell me. I didn't know if I'd get a raise or a promotion at work, but I knew roughly when they would tell me. But right now, we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know when we'll know what's going to happen. And so a lot of us are asking that question. How do we move beyond the pivot? What does it look like for us to move beyond the season we're in right now? And what are the tools that are going to get us there? That's what I'm going to talk about today, because it can be an exciting season. I mean, you can't predict the future, but you can build it. That's something we're all thinking about right now, is how do we build the future going forward? What does that look like? Because there's a simple truth that you and I need to understand. A crisis is a classroom. It's an invitation to innovation that we might not have accepted normally. We might not have learned these things ordinarily, but now, all of a sudden, in the midst of this crisis, we have a chance to learn about our teams, about ourselves, about our companies, about the way forward. And there's three things that the best teams in the world are using right now to build the new path forward. Three tools that they're leaning into to make the most of what's next. The first tool is endurance. Endurance is one of those words that we all need right now. Endurance is important, but what does it really mean? What is endurance? Why do we need it right now? Well, endurance is long-term success in the face of short-term stress. It's looking ahead, looking far ahead and going, okay, here's the season we're in, and there's definitely some short-term stress, but what do we need to do to have long-term success? How do we have endurance? The second definition of endurance is this. It's taking small steps toward big goals. So small actions, little bit of daily actions. What are we doing today that will help us reach a big long-term goal? Endurance is also putting miles between you and your desire to quit. Putting miles, creating a huge gap between you and your desire to quit. Endurance is also being calm in the face of chaos. It's being calm in the face of chaos. And maybe you heard some of those definitions and you thought, that sounds really difficult. I mean, endurance sounds like the kind of thing they yell at you if you're training to become a Navy SEAL. Maybe it's this difficult thing. And I have a friend who's a Navy SEAL, and I asked him, what was the hardest part of training? And he said, well, one of the hardest parts was that you go bald. And I said, that was not what I thought you were going to say. What do you mean you go bald? And he said, well, you have to carry a boat on top of your head for the last week of training, and it rubs a bald spot in your head, and I did not see that coming. Maybe when you hear the word endurance, you think it's going to be incredibly difficult. But I have some good news. Endurance is easier when you have two things, momentum and motivation. These two things make endurance a lot easier. Now, the problem is we want motivation to be a feeling. We want to find one source of motivation, but motivation isn't a feeling, it's a mission. It's something we have to actively work on. You see, a lot of people believe in what I call soulmate motivation. They think, you know what? I'm going to find one thing, one perfect thing that keeps me motivated forever. It's kind of like the Hallmark Christmas movie version of motivation. You know my favorite Hallmark Christmas movie? It's the one where the jaded young executive returns back to her hometown and she falls in love with a lumberjack, kindergarten teacher, firefighter, and he teaches her the true meaning of Christmas, and they get back together right on Christmas Eve. Have you seen that exact one? It's amazing. But a lot of us believe, okay, I'm going to find one source of motivation. That's going to fulfill me, sustain me forever. But here's the problem with that. If you only have one form of motivation, when that quits, so will you. If you only have one form, when that goes away, so will you. You'll give up. Take me, for instance. I love public speaking. It's my favorite thing in the world to do. One of my favorite parts of it is that moment where you get to see people in a live environment, in a live room, get it. When the light bulb goes off and you get to see an audience understand what you're sharing, get engaged by what you're sharing, laugh, and it's amazing. It's such a magical moment. Do you know what would happen if that was my only source of motivation for creating ideas? I would have quit last March when live events got put on pause. I don't believe in one form of motivation. I believe in tactical motivation. I believe in having a long list so that when one thing on the list goes away, you've got 6 other things, 7 other things, 8 other things. I made a list for me to stay motivated. What's on my list as a public speaker? As I learn new ways to do virtual events, as I learn new ways to speak in an environment like this, well, number one, thinking about my kids in virtual school. My kids are doing virtual school right now and they're leaning into it. That's so inspiring to me that I'm not the only one that's learning a new world. So are they. And their little example is a little bit of encouragement. Number 2, client feedback. I love that I get emails. I love that I get comments after that say, hey, that Zoom call was really engaging. We were concerned that it wasn't going to be engaging, but it really was. That client feedback is still really valuable. Number 3, financial goals. This is my job. I have specific financial goals that haven't changed regardless of if the medium changed. Number 4, new skills. I'm developing new skills that are going to serve me for the rest of my career. So are you. The things you're doing in this season, a year from now you'll still be doing. 10 years from now you'll still be doing. Number 5, a sense of camaraderie. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm not the only performer that's trying to figure out a new career as they figure out live events that are on pause. Every musician in Nashville is too. Number 6, all of the other people that are going through work struggles too, that are figuring out new forms of their career. Number 7, the challenge. I love the challenge of this environment. I love trying to see, can I get the tech guy to laugh? The guy here who's heard everything, can I get him to engage? The guy behind the camera, can I get him to laugh and be engaged in the content? I love a new challenge. I have a long form of motivation. So there's your first bit of homework from today. I want you to think about what you're doing right now. What are the new things in your job that are challenging? What are the new things in your industry that are challenging? And then go find 1, 2, 5, 10 forms of motivation so that on some days when you get up and 1 through 5 don't show up too, that you've got 6 through 10 that'll keep you going. That's how you endure when you have motivation. Now what about that second word? Momentum. How do you and I create momentum? How do we maintain momentum? Well, the greatest way to have momentum is to win often. You see, we're an instant gratification society. Culture every day, every form of culture is trying to get you to win instantly. I want to win all the time. Think about Netflix. I can go on to Netflix and have access to nearly every TV show, every movie ever made instantly. I have instant gratification. If my Netflix takes longer than 2 circles to load, my kid's like, Dad, what is going on? Why are we so poor? Get a better job so we can have faster Netflix. Every part of culture is teaching you instant gratification. And you think in that moment, oh, I should push back against that. I should believe in delayed gratification. I should have a year-long goal, and I should have discipline and willpower and white knuckle and hold my breath. But what if you did the reverse? What if you said, okay, instant gratification isn't a bad thing. It just means I should figure out how to win more often. What if you took that long, year-long goal, your 2021 goal, and said, okay, here's how I'm going to accomplish it in smaller ways so that I get to win all year long. I don't wait for the one victory. I get to win all year long. The best way to win often is to shrink the year. Shrink your year. In 2019, I ran 1,000 miles, and that goal is way too big. That goal is way too massive for me. When I looked at it, it was discouraging. If I ran 5 miles one day, 5 out of 1,000 is really discouraging. There's 99.5% to go, and I would feel frustrated. So I had to shrink the year. I had to take that and go, okay, I'm not going to just go from 0 miles to 1,000. That's like holding my breath for a year. I'm going to find wins along the way. I'm going to shrink the year. So how many miles would I need to run if I did it in 12-month segments? Okay, 12, goes into 1,000. That's 83 miles a month. All right, that's a little better. 5 out of 83 feels like progress, but it's still too big. What if I said, okay, on a weekly basis, what would I need to do? Okay, I need to run 21 miles a week. So 5 out of 21 feels successful. Now when I run 5 miles, I've completed 25% of my goal. I've had a daily win. What would it look like for you to take your 2021 goals, to take your big goals that are headed your way and say, okay, how do I shrink them? What does it look like to get them on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, on a daily basis? It's really hard to get excited about a goal that's a year long. Most people can't even wrap their mind around that, especially after the year we've had. Right now, 3 days from now feels firm. I can trust 3 days from now, this is what I'll be doing. 3 weeks from now feels a little bit fuzzy. 3 months from now feels like pure fiction. So what if instead of trying to gaze a year out, you said, we're going to take this big year goal and shrink it down so that we have some momentum? Because if you want to endure, there's really some specific things you can do. 1, get yourself a really good motivation list. Keep adding things to it. 2, figure out how to get some momentum. Shrink the year so that every day you can win a little bit more than you did yesterday. The second thing the best teams in the world are doing is they're using flexibility. Now, flexibility sounds a little easier than endurance, right? Endurance feels tough and gritty and I've got to do it. Flexibility feels a little more like yoga. But there are 2 types of enemies that get in the way of flexibility. 2 things that you have to be very careful about. The first one is entitlement. Now, that's a word we've discussed for years in culture. We've talked about entitlement like there's an entitled generation, the entitled consumer, they expect things they haven't earned. There's a lot of different definitions of entitlement. But where entitlement gets in the way of your flexibility as you head into this brave new world, where entitlement gets in the way is with this sentence: I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to do this. What's the this? All the new things your job is going to require because of how the world has turned into. All the new things that you're going to have to deal with that maybe you didn't see coming. I think about this. Retail companies, for instance. Banana Republic, let's just take them as an example. Banana Republic has to clean their store 100 times more than they used to. This time last year, every employee didn't have to wipe down every cash register after every sale. That's a new task. They've added multiple steps to a job that already had a lot of steps. It would be easy for them to go, I shouldn't have to do this. Insurance companies. I've talked to insurance agents and they said, you know what? One of my greatest strengths was the pop-in. I'd pop in on clients, pop in on customers. I could bring them coffee. I could interact. They lost the pop-in. Now it takes them multiple steps to get a phone call set up to interact with people. They could easily say, I shouldn't have to do this. I talked to a bank and they said, we had to file 10,000 different PPP loans. We had to do all of that at once. We had to get everybody to work on that. And these were executives that hadn't filed things manually for years. It would have been easy for them to say, I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to do this new way. But the reality is we're all going to have to do a lot of work. Some of us are going to have to do 2 or 3 times more effort to get the same results we did a year ago because things are disrupted right now. And I'm speaking from experience. For my job, I had so many specific things I would do on site. When I showed up at a live event, I had a checklist of the 10 things I did. I knew how to connect in a room. I had all these things that I spent 10 years learning, and then boop, it got put on pause. And I had to learn new things. And I'd love to say that right away I thought, you know what? I'll embrace the new. That's no problem, but that's not true. I grumbled at first. You can ask my wife, she'll tell you. My attitude wasn't fantastic, but I came to a decision point. I came to a simple choice, and it's a choice you have too. You can pine or plan. You can pine. You can look back and say, it used to be easier, things used to be better, I shouldn't have to do this. You can grumble, you can moan, you can whine, you can pine, or you can plan. You can plan the way forward. You can say, okay, here's what we know about the situation we're in. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to build. Here's where we're headed. We're going to plan. And one way that I've learned to help beat back that sense of entitlement is with gratitude, to be grateful. I'm grateful that I have a speakers bureau that has an amazing studio that I can record in. I'm grateful that there's virtual events. I'm grateful that I've been able to encourage smaller audiences of 10, 15 people versus just 1,000-person audiences. I'm grateful that I've learned new things. I'm going out of my way to find new sources of gratefulness to beat back that entitlement, because that's the first enemy of flexibility. When you get entitled, you get rigid. When you get entitled, you get stuck. When you get entitled, you get frozen and you don't learn the new thing. The second enemy of flexibility is fear. And fear tells you new things are dangerous. New things, the new things you're going to have to do are dangerous. And what's really interesting, something I've discovered, is that if you're really amazing at the old way, you're even more likely to push back against the new way. Some of your top performers, the people that are the best at the old way, are going to be the most hesitant about the new way. Why? Because they've got the most to lose. If you were average at the old way, if you weren't great at the old way, you can't wait for the new way. You go, I can't wait to push the old way back into the distance. But if you were great, if you were proficient, if you were a leader, if you were amazing at the old way, you might be hesitant. Fear might get loud in that moment and go, you don't know how to do that. You're not going to do it well. We have to fight back on that. And fear gets loud in those moments. And here's what I need you to remember. Fear gets a voice, not a vote. I don't like when people say there's a way for you to never have another fear. You can learn how to be fearless. I don't think that's true. I think you'll always have some degree of fear, and here's why. Because you're always going to do new, bigger things. As you expand your career, as you expand your company, as you expand your opportunities, you'll expand the fear that shows up. For instance, the first time I ever spoke to a room full of 10 people, I had 10-person fear. I was afraid of those 10 people. I had 10-person fear, but then I did it. And then I did it again, and then I did it again, and then I got over that 10-person fear, but then I got to speak to 100 people, and all of a sudden I had a 100-person fear because it was a bigger room, and so a new fear showed up, and so I practiced, and I worked on it, and I did it. And then I got to speak to 1,000 people, and guess what showed up? You got it, 1,000-person fear. At each new level of your career, at each new stage, you're going to have fear waiting there, but it gets a voice, but not a vote. It doesn't get to sit at the table and tell you whether or not to do that thing. You can hear it, you can acknowledge it, and still do the thing anyway. You've got to give it a voice, not a vote. So we talked about the two enemies. Okay, entitlement, we need to watch out for that. And we need to be really careful about our fears. Okay, we can fight both of those, but how do we make ourselves more flexible? Knowing that we're going to have to be very flexible in the months and years to come, how do we encourage ourselves to be more flexible? Well, the fastest path to flexibility is curiosity. The fastest path to flexibility is curiosity. You have to very deliberately curate a curious mindset. I've been thinking about mindset a lot lately. You see, I spent the last 2 years writing a book about overthinking and about our mindset. And it's really interesting because overthinking steals time, creativity, and productivity. Overthinking steals all these things for us. And it's also the most expensive thing that companies invest in without even knowing. I call overthinking a soundtrack. It's a soundtrack you listen to. And it's really interesting to see which teams struggle with which soundtracks. These negative thoughts that might be getting in the way of what they really want as a company. One of them is criticism, especially in the form of a new idea. If your first reaction to a brand new idea is to criticize it, be careful. You might have a negative soundtrack that's getting in the way. If your first response to a new idea is to poke holes in it or to say why it won't work or to fight it, you might have an old soundtrack that's getting in the way. What would happen at your company, on your team, if you stopped saying, that will never work here, and started saying, I wonder how that could work here? The words aren't that different, right? I mean, a lot of them are the same, but imagine if you said, okay, instead of saying that'll never work here, and me automatically saying that and putting cold water on the idea, what if I got curious? Said, I wonder how that could work here. Like, I don't see it yet, but I wonder, could we explore that? Could we be generous with each other and figure that out? Now, this lesson took me a long time to learn, and I learned it sitting on an airplane. I was flying to Portland, Oregon one night, and I was sitting next to Jeremy Cowart. He's a world-renowned photographer. Forbes, the Huffington Post, Yahoo, they all call him the most influential photographer on the internet. From taking photos of Taylor Swift to presenting at the UN, he's done it all. And so during our conversation, I asked him, I said, well, what are you working on next? And he got kind of quiet, and he said, well, I've actually been working on a hotel. He said, for the last few years, that's been my kind of secret passion is I want to do a hotel called the Purpose Hotel where every room sponsors a child, and in the lobby there's a charity water well, and even the soap is sustainable. Every aspect of the hotel serves somebody and serves a greater need. And then he did that pause. You know that pause? Where people pause and wait to see what your reaction is going to be. He kind of waited there expectantly. And my face said, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And my mouth said, I don't know, are you sure? And I criticized it. You know who didn't? Horst Schulze, the co-founder of the Ritz-Carlton. He's helping Jeremy build a hotel. And years later, Jeremy would tell me it was really discouraging when you reacted that way. And I had to come up with a new soundtrack. And here's my new soundtrack. Curiosity beats criticism. Curiosity beats criticism. You're headed to a time where you're going to experience more new things than you've ever experienced. New technologies, new paths forward, new retail change, new shipping supplies. Everything is going to have an element of new. You'll have a choice. You can criticize it. You can say, well, it'll never work. Or you can be flexible and you can be curious. And so I'd ask you to hold that soundtrack in your heart and in your head. Curiosity beats criticism. The third and final tool that the best teams are using going forward is compassion. Now I know that's a soft word, isn't it? Compassion, it feels like it's a gentle word, but I want to redefine it. Here's how I redefine compassion. Compassion is kindness plus action. It's kindness plus action. It always means you're moving towards action for someone else. You're doing something. Now, why does this matter right now? Because the emotional supply chain is disrupted too. It is. It's not just our shipping chain. It's not just our regular supply chain. It's not just toilet paper, bikes, and kayaks that are hard to get. The emotional supply chain is disrupted too. Every client, every coworker, every person you're interacting with right now is emotionally low. Now, here's why that's good news. Crisis magnifies kindness. The little things you do right now are worth 100 times what they were a year ago. The tiny things you do for customers are worth more than they've ever been because the crisis magnifies kindness. I thought about that the other day. I went on a run, and I was on this big trail run, and it was wide enough that I could be socially distant, and an elderly gentleman passed me, and I had seen him the day before, and this time when he passed me, he gave me a double thumbs up. And that made my day. I told my wife about it when I got home. I'm telling you about it right now. 6 months ago, I might have been like, double thumbs up? Who does that? I mean, one thumb is enough. Two feels extravagant. But now, because we're also disconnected, a little bit of being seen meant the world to me. Compassion matters. So there's 3 types I want you to think about. Number 1, compassion for your team. How do you, on the team you're on, have compassion for the people you work with? And why does it matter? Well, it matters because teams are falling apart because virtual work creates partial relationships. Virtual work creates partial relationships. We're all missing the 100 different micro interactions that being in the same place generates. You know when you work in an office, there's casual lunches. Somebody on a Tuesday goes, hey, we're all going to go out to lunch. Do you want to come with us? And you get to connect. Those casual conversations you have in the break room matter. The pop over your head and in a cubicle and say something to a coworker, that matters. And right now we're all missing those. And we've got these partial relationships. And in absence, animosity grows and disconnection grows. So how do we change that? How do we have compassion? Well, go first. Go first with your team. What does that look like? Well, it looks like a shift in mindset. You see, old school leadership used to believe this. If I share my weaknesses, people won't trust my strengths. If I share my weaknesses, people won't trust my strengths, so I better pretend like I've got it all together. I better act like I've got it all together. I better not admit any weaknesses. New school leadership is the opposite. New school leadership says, if I pretend I don't have weaknesses, people won't trust my strengths. If I pretend like I've got it all together, people won't trust me. And that's true especially of younger generations. Younger generations can see your marketing from 1,000 miles away. They can smell fake. They're ready to go, oh, they're not being authentic. Oh, they're not being vulnerable. And you've got an invitation, a chance to understand, okay, if I share weaknesses, it forms connection. What's funny about that is if you ever are honest with a coworker, if you ever say to somebody, yeah, I'm sorry about that situation in the meeting. I got angrier than I wanted to. They're never surprised. They never go, what? You get angry sometimes? We had no idea. We just call that happy screaming. They always are aware. They just don't know if you're aware too. And what's interesting is when you go first with your story, do you know what happens? You give people the gift of going second. It's hard to go first. It is. You don't know where the line is. But when you go first, you give everyone else in the room the gift of going second. When you go, hey, here's this thing that's been challenging. Hey, here's this thing that I'm working on that's just been frustrating. Or hey, here's this thing that I'm trying to fix. You give everyone else in the room the chance to raise their hand and go, yeah, me too. That's been challenging on my end. So have compassion for your team. The second type of compassion you need to have, compassion for your customer. You need to have compassion for your customer. Right now, there's no such thing as a small thing. The little things you do matter. And what's really exciting about that is the stories you write this year will stick around for a decade. The stories you and your team are writing this year will stick around for a decade. How do I know? Well, no one tells the easy story around the campfire. No one ever goes, oh, there was this time when we had all the budget we needed, we had all the resources we needed, everything was working really smoothly, like it was smooth sailing the entire time. No one tells that story. You know what stories they tell? They say, hey, things got turned upside down. Hey, things got changed. There were new regulations, the new challenges, new obstacles that we had to pull together. We had to learn how to do curbside delivery. We'd been in the mall. We were a retail store that's stuck in the mall. We never knew how to do the stories on the outside, and it was really challenging. So we had to figure out how do we get what we do all the way to the sidewalk, and we had to reinvent our business. Those are the stories people tell. Stories like the one Signet Jewelers told me. Signet Jewelers is one of my clients. I love getting to do events with them. And they own massive jewelry stores across the country in every mall in America. Stores like Kay and Jared and Zales. And what a lot of people don't know is that when the shutdown happened, when things got put on pause, they got left with millions of dollars of jewelry in their safes from other people. Think about that. At every store in America, somebody had brought a ring in, a wedding ring, an engagement ring to get it fixed or worked on. And all of a sudden, all those stores got closed and they had all this merchandise that wasn't theirs. And they wanted to figure out how do we get it to people, especially in Temecula, California. In Temecula, California, there was a wife who was getting ready to celebrate a 25th wedding anniversary. And this one meant a lot to her, more than just a regular 25th wedding anniversary, because her husband was in stage 4 of lung cancer. And so she said to Signet, hey, is there any way that I can get the ring? And this is California. Your state, whatever state you're in right now, doesn't have as many regulations as California. And the manager of the store, it would have been easier for her to say, you know what? It's too complicated, it's too difficult, it's too hard. Instead, she said, I wonder how that could work. I wonder how that could work. Instead, she got curious. She got 19 different approvals. 19 different approvals. She drove the ring down herself to Temecula, California. She gave it to the wife herself. She said the wife fell to her knees when she did. That story is going to reverberate around the halls of Signet Jewelers for years and years to come. Right now, your team, your company, is writing new stories. You have to collect them. Don't get so busy. Don't hustle so hard that you forget them. Right now, you should all be story collectors because this is a season you're going to want to look back on. A year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, when it's difficult again, I want you to be able to say, no. We got through 2020. We got through 2021. We can do this new challenge too. That's what it looks like to have compassion for your customer. The last one, you've got to have compassion for yourself. You've got to have compassion for yourself. You have to be intentional about the story you tell yourself about yourself. So I mentioned I wrote a book about overthinking. It was really, really interesting because me and Mike Peasley, who's a PhD at NTSU, he's a professor, we asked 10,000 people if they struggle with overthinking. 10,000 people. We did a big survey. We asked all those people, and 99.5% of them said yes. 99.5% of them said yes. What was interesting, though, was that we couldn't find a single person who overthought compliments. We couldn't find a single person who overthought positive things about themselves. Nobody in the research said, yeah, my big issue is that I'm just too kind to myself. Like, I'm always thinking compliments. I'm always thinking how I'm the right person to do this, or I'm qualified enough, or I'm the right age. Like, I just keep overthinking compliments. It's a real hassle. No, that's not what people overthink. People overthink negative voices. They overthink insults. That's what you remember at the grocery store. No one at the grocery store all of a sudden gets like knocked down by a positive thing that happened 3 years ago. No, you remember something negative, a thing you failed at, a comment from a stranger. That's what you remember. That's what you overthink. And so you've got to be really intentional about what's the story you're telling yourself about yourself. I always think this, if overthinking or beating yourself up burned calories, we'd all have six-pack abs. Nobody would need a Peloton. You wouldn't need a Peloton because you would just get in shape by constantly beating yourself up. But we know that doesn't work. And so I think this is a year, this is a season to give yourself ample amounts of grace. Why? This is probably your first global pandemic. No one watching this right now is like, you know what? I've been through like 10 global pandemics. I've been working on a global pandemic for the last 3 years. No, this is all new to us. And I keep seeing people beat themselves up over not being good at new things. I meet so many parents that say, John, I'm the worst at homeschooling. I'm the worst at virtual school. I'm just terrible at it. And I always say, yeah, I bet you're terrible at hang gliding too. You've never done that. I bet you're terrible at hang gliding. You've got to give yourself more grace. And if you want a really easy way to understand how to be more compassionate to yourself, think about this. If you wouldn't say it to a friend, don't say it to yourself. If you wouldn't say what you're saying internally to a friend externally, there's a chance you shouldn't say it to yourself. If you said 10% of the things that you overthink to a friend, they would pull back and go, wait a second, why do we hang out? You're really negative. This isn't encouraging. If you wouldn't say it to a friend, don't say it to yourself. If you want to build the future, there's three tools you can use: endurance, flexibility, and compassion. We've got an amazing opportunity. The road ahead is unrolling every day. We get to build it. We get to create it. And what makes it even easier to create is when you have endurance, when you have flexibility, and when you have compassion. Now, normally when I do a speech, the question I get is, well, what's next? What's next? And sometimes I'm able to answer that by saying, hey, let's go hang out in the back of the room. I've got a new book. Let's talk through some things. But I don't get to say that because we're virtual. So I created something for you as an answer to what's next. If you want the first chapter of my brand new book, Soundtracks, just text 44222 and text the word soundtracks. So write soundtracks and then text 44222 and I'll send you the first chapter free. I love that I got to share a few ideas with you today, and I can't wait to see what you do with them.
So John, thank you so much for joining us for Premier's free Virtual Friday. Thank you everyone for joining us here as well. You can sign up for our next free Virtual Friday presentation at freevirtualfridays.com. You can also see several 25 or 30 past free Virtual Friday events. We want to make sure we've got a great catalog for you. So from all of us here at Premier Speakers and National Speakers, thanks again for joining us for free Virtual Fridays.